Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Oftentimes said that if you want to know something about cults, world religions, prophecy, or a variety of other topics, certainly the person to converse with is Ron Rhodes, and he's in studio with us again. He is the president of Reasoning from the Scriptures Ministries. He has authored more than 70 books, and for those of you that go to our Facebook page, you'll see a picture of the two of us, plus I guess I brought in about 24 of your books, just to give people an idea of how many books I have just on my shelf here in the studio. He has written a number of books, and I won't go through all 70, but Unmasking the Antichrist, Conversations with Jehovah's Witnesses, the book we talked about last time he was in studio, What Happens After Life. He is an individual that has been a professor at Dallas Theological Seminary, Talbot Seminary, Veritas Evangelical Seminary, holds both a THM and a THD, and for many years was also regularly appearing on the Christian Research Institute's popular radio program, The Bible Answer Man. Ron Rhodes, always great to have you in studio.
Well, thanks. It's always good to be with you. How have you been?
I have been very well, and you kind of love this new studio, don't you?
Oh, this is great.
This is great stuff, and so people can not only hear you, but if they go to the Livecast right now, they can watch the interview of us. And while I'm talking about watching, we've also posted a very good presentation you did at Dallas Theological Seminary and 7 Keys to Conversing with Others, especially in the cult, so we'll certainly make that available. We have the article today on the book, Conversations with Jehovah's Witnesses, and of course a link to your website, ronrhodes.org, right?
That's it.
Get it right. And we're going to spend some time talking about Jehovah's Witness, but if you a little bit later want to ask questions about other various groups, cults, things of that nature, that is fair game as well. If anybody is familiar with you, Ron, they know that a previous book, probably one of your best-known books, is this one I'm holding up right now, Reasoning from the Scriptures with Jehovah's Witnesses. So if you wanted to get the full meal deal, that's 450 pages, that's there.
Right.
But you decided that in addition to the teaching in that one, you wanted to have a book that sort of provided training. And if somebody says, well, I've got a Jehovah's Witness friend, or I've had Jehovah's Witnesses come to the door, and I'd like to know what to say, but I don't have the time to really get into this in a lot of detail, what do you do? I guess you can look at either one of those books, but it seems to me that this particular book that we're going to talk about today actually gives an individual a chance to kind of figure out what they might say if that conversation goes in that direction.
Well, really, it's not one or the other. It's the kind of thing where they complement each other. And here's what I mean in terms of distinguishing teaching and training. Let's say that I was a pilot teaching you how to fly. Okay, I could sit you down in a classroom and teach you all about aerodynamics and teach you everything I know about all that, but you're still not ready to fly.
Yeah.
I would need to take you up personally in an airplane and let you see me do it. Okay? Now, my book, Reasoning from the Scriptures with Jehovah's Witnesses, has a lot of great teaching in there and deals with every verse that Jehovah's Witnesses bring up. But in the other book, the Conversations with Jehovah's Witnesses, I train people. And it's almost as if the reader has an opportunity to look over my shoulder as I'm talking to a Jehovah's Witness. Mm-hmm. And I show them, among other things, how to segue to important stuff. I'm sure you realize how often Jehovah's Witnesses will talk about birthdays, or maybe why Christmas is evil, or why the U.S. government is a satanic government, or, things like that. Those can be interesting discussions, but they don't pertain to salvation.
Right.
So you need to learn how to segue to very important topics, and I show the reader how to do that. And you can basically use what they say as a launch pad to talking about something important. For example, if they bring up blood transfusions, which they often do,
yes,
You can talk about that for maybe 3 minutes, and then you could segue by saying something like, all this talk about, blood has made me think about the blood of Christ that he shed for our salvation. Would you mind if we talk about salvation for a few minutes? All right, that was just very simple, but you're using what they say to segue to something very, very important. And so I show you, no matter what they say, how to use what they say to get to the stuff you really need to talk about.
This book is published by Harvest House. You might be able to find it in your local bookstore, but both of the books we've been mentioning are available on your website, and I would encourage people to do so. And when we talk about conversations, I thought early on you talk about the importance of listening. We just did a program the other day about communication theory, and it's amazing how oftentimes we know what we want to say. We sort of like we got the 6-shooter and it's in the holster. We got 6 bullets and we are ready to.
You want to do a quick draw, right?
Yeah, and you make a real point about that. Really, tactical conversing really involves listening. Talk about that.
It really does. How would you feel if you were talking to somebody and somebody was always interrupting you? Mm-hmm. I don't like it. But this is confession time. It used to be, way back before I even went to seminary, when I was conversing with Jehovah's Witnesses, I would always interrupt. And you know what? I won all the arguments, but I never saw conversion. Mm-hmm. And I just came to slowly see that that's just the wrong thing to do. People feel good when they think that you're paying attention to them and you're listening to them. And besides, how do you know what you're going to really want to say unless you let them represent themselves fairly? I tell you the big problem a lot of Christians have. We have a tendency to tell cultists what they believe. Oh, you're that group that believes such and so. And very often I've discovered that the cultist on the doorstep may very well say, well, I don't believe that. And so what you want to do is just let them say their piece. You will have plenty of opportunity to tell them the truth in Jesus Christ. But I tell you what, I know how hard it is. When you're sitting there listening to what they're saying about Jesus and the Trinity and, salvation by works, you want to hop in. I understand that. Just be patient. Soon enough, you'll have the opportunity to share with them. And then once they stop talking, you can just go into it full bore.
When we talked about that communication theory just the other day on the program here, we talked about the fact that sometimes we have this feeling that we have to interrupt because as somebody is beginning to speak heresy or false doctrine or whatever, we feel that if we sit there and quietly listen, we're giving assent and even consent,
right,
and approval of those ideas. Not necessarily the case. And it's worth listening to them because, as you just pointed out, whether you're talking to a Jehovah's Witness or somebody that's in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or Christian Science or Scientology, whatever, some people might know a great deal. A Mormon missionary, for example, might know a lot more than a person that's a local stake. A person that's been in Jehovah's Witnesses for 40 years might know a lot more than a new convert that has just maybe knocked on your door and you're the first person they've ever met. So to figure out what they know or don't know is really very key, isn't it?
Well, it is key, and it's real important to distinguish between what you say and how you say it. How you say it is critically important in today's evangelism. And I don't care whether they're a trainer or a trainee on the doorstep. Typically there's both, a trainee and a trainer.
That's what I've found.
And if you're nice, I always invite one or the other to come back or as a group. I always say it's fine for them to come back as a single person, without the other, just because, I want that young trainee to feel free to come back. If I spark their attention, I don't want them to feel in bondage to the trainer. Yeah. And so I make a point of doing that. But see, they're only going to want to come back if I've been really nice to them. And I remember I was talking to 2 Jehovah's Witnesses, about a year ago, and there was a trainer and a trainee. And so I always like to ask questions. And so I said, well, now, if I've got you guys right, you believe in 2 gods, right? An almighty God and a lesser God. And the trainee said, oh, no, we don't believe that at all. And then the trainer said, yeah, we do believe that.
Let's take a break. I want to continue this conversation, obviously, and that's leading into a section here about speech peppered by grace, and we'll talk about some of that as well. But need to take one of those mandatory breaks. Ron Rhodes with us in studio today. We'll open up the phone soon to give you a chance to ask some questions. All that coming up right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Perhaps you've seen the full-page advertisement with this attention-getting headline: Jews rejected child sacrifice 3,500 years ago. Now it's Hamas's turn. Nobel Prize laureate Elie Wiesel is calling on Hamas and others in the Muslim world to reject the practice of using children as human shields and suicide bombers. He begins with biblical history. Over 3,000 years ago, God stopped Abraham from killing his son. Both sons, Isaac and Ishmael, received promises that they would father great nations. He concludes that the Canaanite practices of child sacrifice to Moloch were forever left behind. Unfortunately, they were not left behind. He says that the real battle today is not between Jew versus Arab or Israeli versus Palestinian. Rather, it is a battle between those who celebrate life and those who champion death. It is a battle of civilization versus barbarism. He observes that the two cultures that brought us the Psalms of David and the rich libraries of the Ottoman Empire share a love of life. What a contrast to the dark future offered by Hamas. Parents in Gaza City and Tel Aviv want peace, but they will not experience it as long as the Hamas death cult reigns. He says that moderate men and women of faith must shift their criticism from the Israeli soldiers and focus instead on the terrorists who have taken away all choice from the Palestinian children of Gaza. He believes that the Palestinian people should find true Muslims to represent them and truly value life. They should find Muslims who would never place children in danger. His goal is to return child sacrifice to the darkest corner of history and work towards a brighter future with those who choose life. Although I share his hope, I do have my doubts about whether we can indeed achieve such a goal. Nevertheless, we should continue to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Ron Rhodes in studio with us today, and if you'd like to watch the live cast, it's at our website, pointofview.net, and the book is entitled Conversations with Jehovah's Witnesses, a friendly approach to sharing the truth about God in the Bible. First half or 7 chapters about the tactics of tactical conversing, then we'll get into some of the key issues. But since we're there, you talked a little bit in this book about being gracious. We've already sort of illustrated that, but also the importance of asking questions.
Yes.
And if you think about it, Jesus probably did as much asking questions as he did teaching and preaching, so that should tell us something.
Well, it should teach you something. In fact, Jesus asked over 200 questions in the New Testament.
Yes.
200 questions.
200
now,
questions.
That gets my attention when I see that. And I think that asking questions forces the other people to give some thought to what you've asked about. Now, I've learned by hard trial that you cannot force your theology down the throat of a Jehovah's Witness, or really anybody else for that matter. But by asking good questions, you can make them think about things in a new way. Just to give you an example, very often I will be talking with a Jehovah's Witness, and they'll bring up the Watchtower Society. And they say that you can't understand the Bible without the Watchtower Society. And you must have dependent Bible study, dependent on the Watchtower Society. If you use the Bible alone, you will be in darkness within 2 years. That's what they've been teaching.
That's something.
And so what I've done is I've talked to them and asked them questions like, well, it makes me wonder, since the Watchtower didn't come into being until the 19th century, how did people prior to the 19th century come to understand the Bible? Was God without a witness during those centuries? And if God did not have a witness during those centuries and couldn't help people to understand the Bible, then does that mean that God did not care about those people that lived back then?
Good question.
And then I'll ask other questions like, now, if those people didn't need it, then why do we? And then you take them back even further. Where in the New Testament do you see people having to submit to the watchtower when they're reading about the Old Testament?
Mm-hmm.
And so by asking questions, you're actually helping them to think for themselves. And I can promise you that when they go home, they're going to be thinking about some of that stuff. And that's what you want to have happen.
And part of, we'll just use Jehovah's Witnesses as an example, but I think it's illustrative in a lot of other cults, is the assumption that everybody is wrong except for us.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm with Probe Ministries, and I've just noticed on our Facebook somebody attacking the Trinity and doing it in such a way as saying, well, you're misled. Well, no, everybody that's ever believed in that is misled, according to that. And this small group of individuals have the truth about the Trinity, or the truth about this interpretation, or the truth about this particular verse in John 1. You have a fair amount of ego strength you have to keep up to, in a sense, say, everybody's wrong except my small group. And when you ask questions, you start looking around saying, yeah, are these people that I'm with necessarily the best Bible scholars that have ever existed on the planet? What is it that they know that everyone else doesn't know?
Well, what I like to do in addition to asking those kind of questions, I kind of like to use a two-pronged approach. One is to ask them questions that makes them think about what they've been taught biblically. But I also like to undermine the Watchtower Society with their false prophecies and their many changes. Like they prophesied, for example, that God would set up his kingdom back in 1914. It didn't happen. In 1925, it was prophesied that the patriarchs like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would be resurrected and come and live in a big mansion in San Diego called Beth Sharim. And they never showed up, back in 1925. And then in 1975, it was prophesied that God would set up his kingdom again. And in preparation for that, a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses sold their homes and used their life savings to go door to door, telling people that the end was near. Now, once 1975 came and went, they were very upset, and hundreds of thousands of defections took place.
Very true.
But you see, the thing of it is that indicates a false prophet. They've claimed to be a prophet all along, but a false prophet, it's not someone you want to listen to. Biblical prophets never made mistakes. They had a 100% accuracy rate. In fact, if you gave a false prophecy, you were taken out back and stoned in biblical times. But the Watchtower has been wrong time and time again. So, like I said, it's a two-pronged approach. On the one hand, I want to undermine the Watchtower based upon the false prophecies. But on the other hand, I want to ask those questions that gets them to think about, the different things they've been taught. If you're wondering where you can find some of those kind of questions, that's where the Reasoning from the Scriptures book comes in.
Right.
Because that book has over 350 questions that you can ask to lovingly nail them against the wall. And I say lovingly because your ultimate goal is to pull those nails out of the wall and to walk them straight to the biblical Jesus and the biblical gospel.
And that's important, too, because it's not that you're just trying to disprove Jehovah's Witness, but also provide a platform for them to come to something else. Because there's a price to be paid if you leave the Jehovah's Witness.
Right. It's not just a matter of cursing the darkness.
Yeah.
It's a matter of lighting a candle in the midst of the darkness. It's not just a matter of saying, well, you're wrong. You've got to take them to the truth. Now, you don't have the power to convert them. Okay, let's get that established right up front. No, you don't have the power to convert anybody. Only God can do that, but you are his witness. Now, I say that for a couple of reasons. First, it takes the burden off of you. If the Jehovah's Witness doesn't convert on the spot, that's not your problem.
No.
You be a faithful witness, and you leave the conversion to God. But secondly, it helps us to be encouraged because all we have to do is to be as faithful a witness as we can.
Right.
And everybody can do it. Every Christian who hears my voice can do it. In fact, at the very least, the thing that you can do is to share your testimony about what Jesus has done in your life. You may not be an expert on what the Jehovah's Witnesses believe, and you may not be an expert in theology, but you are an expert in what Jesus has done in your life. And here's the thing. Based upon exit counseling with cultists, one thing that we have discovered is that of the things that cultists tend to remember when they leave your doorstep is not theological argumentation. The thing they tend to remember is your testimony.
Your testimony.
So I always recommend give your testimony and talk a lot about the grace of God and what Jesus did for you at the cross. If you can kind of work your doctrine into your testimony, that's a great approach.
Sure. Dr. Ron Rhodes with us as we talk about conversing and conversations with Jehovah's Witnesses. And you sort of anticipated my next comment, which I'll just make a comment now, and that is you had a section here about your testimony. And I know today, lots of times, Ron, we have individuals say, well, your testimony is not as important as apologetics. Even when people do evangelism, they sometimes think, well, should I share my testimony? Because if I share that with somebody that's in the New Age, they might say, well, I understand that, and I lost my stress, and I was able to have peace because I went to this ashram or I got this mantra. So I think a lot of people today have downplayed the value of their testimony. There are really two things they cannot deny: the truth of God's Word and the truth of your own personal testimony. So I really encourage people to share their testimony in any evangelistic opportunity that they have.
Absolutely. In fact, it's not either or, it's both and. Apologetics is necessary because apologetics basically answers their objections to the faith. Mm-hmm. Before they can understand the truth, their objections have to be answered. But in addition to all of that, you can work a lot of that truth into your personal testimony. And like I said, for whatever reason, cultists tend to remember what you said about what Jesus has done in your life, in your testimony. So it's an effective strategy.
Let's get into some of the actual issues. And the first couple of chapters, you talk about conversations about the Watchtower Society, conversations about the New World Translation. Most people would have thought you'd start with God, but again, sometimes it's helpful for individuals to recognize that you can point out some of the problems with either the Watchtower Society or their particular Bible translation.
Well, see, here's the thing. You have to deal with the Watchtower up front, because if you don't, no matter what you say about God or Jesus, they're not going to listen.
That's a good point.
You see, you've got to deal with the basis of authority. And unless you can deal with the basis of authority for what they believe, then you're not going to make a lot of progress, because they really believe in the Watchtower Society. They believe it is a voice of God on earth. They believe that Jehovah himself speaks through the literature that is published by the Watchtower. And believe me, they do a good job of publishing those books. They do a good job in their magazines. I mean, it's really got some good artwork and, very appealing layout and all that kind of stuff.
Very true.
It goes out to 25 million people a month. That's what their Watchtower magazine hits. That's up there with Reader's Digest.
Yes.
So, like I said, it's considered the voice of God, and unless you deal with that Watchtower first, it doesn't make sense to deal with a lot of the other stuff.
The other part of that is the Bible, their translation. You have studied Greek and Hebrew, and do have a doctorate in these areas, and certainly would, I think, be able to look at various translations and evaluate those. And how does the translation that is used by Jehovah's Witnesses stand up to many of these other translations?
Well, I've looked at what some of the top linguists in the world have said about this, and they use words like pernicious, horrible. And when you see words like that, that gets your attention pretty quickly.
Yes.
I think it's fair to say that the New World Translation is an extremely biased translation in favor of Watchtower theology. Mm-hmm. Individual verses are translated in such a way that they support the Watchtower view of Jesus, the Watchtower view of the Trinity, the Watchtower view of the Gospel. And just to give you an indication of what I'm talking about, they'll take some of the verses in the Gospel of John, which are amazing supports for the deity of Christ. There's not a book in the Bible that's got better support for the deity of Christ, than John's Gospel. But man, they just do gymnastics in that book, and they retranslate it. Of course, the most well-known one is John 1:1, where Jesus is said to be a God, as opposed to the Father being God. So Jesus is said to be a lesser God. And it doesn't stop there, because they go to different verses in the Bible to support their view, such as Jesus saying that the Father is greater than I am, or Jesus being called the firstborn in Colossians 1:15, or Jesus being called the Son of God in John 3:16. You see, they build their cohesive argument for the idea that Jesus is an inferior being to God the Father, and their Bible itself is translated to support that.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, perhaps you have a comment or question, 1-800-351-1212. Dr. Ron Rhodes with us, and if you have questions about Bible, theology, or certainly some of these religious groups, we'd love to hear from you.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221, or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation today, in studio with us, Dr. Ron Rhodes. First 7 chapters, the basics of tactical conversing. We've talked a little bit about the style, then we're getting into now some of the substance, another 13 chapters, conversing on the big issues, and we'll come back to some of the issues we put on the table, but let's take a phone call because I think it'll set us up for some of our conversation. So we'll go first to Arizona, KNLB. Ed, you're on with Ron Rhodes.
Yes, Kerby, I just wanted to ask, how do the Jehovah's Witnesses deal with the very first verse of the Bible? in the beginning, God created. Whenever the original word for God in that verse is Elohim, and whenever a word ends in I-am, as in cherubim, seraphim, it means that there is more than one. And then it goes on later and it says, we created man in our image.
Yeah, let us create
Once
God
again,
in our image. Our, plural, yeah.
Once again, plural. But the very first verse of the Bible is Elohim, and that's more than one.
Sure. Ron, your thoughts?
Well, that's a great point, and I can tell you're a Trinitarian. It sounds like a good thing there. And, of course, there's a lot of good arguments for the Trinity, primarily in the New Testament, but we see gleanings or hints in the Old Testament as well. What's interesting is that the term Elohim can be used of the one triune God. The term Elohim can be used in Scripture of the Father alone. It can also be used of Jesus alone. For example, Isaiah 9:6, where the Messiah, the coming Messiah, is called Elohim.
Elohim. Mm-hmm.
So context determines exactly how it's to be used. Now, certainly that's a good supporting verse. Genesis 1:1 is a good supporting verse for the Trinity. However, it's really the New Testament verses that prove the doctrine of the Trinity. There's many Hebrew grammarians that will say that the term Elohim in Genesis 1:1 may be a plural of majesty, indicating God's greatness, just as in Isaiah 9:6, the term Elohim, when used of Jesus, would portray Jesus as the majestic God. And so we need to understand that that's a legitimate point. And Greek grammarians also tell us that any pronouns that are used in conjunction with the plural noun must be plural as well. Words like us and our.
Yeah. So in the New Testament, that really helps you a tremendous amount.
It really helps us a lot. I do think that Genesis 1:1 is a great supportive evidence for the doctrine of the Trinity. But a better verse might, for example, be Matthew 28:19, where we're told to baptize in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. The word name is singular in the Greek, indicating one God, but there's a definite article in front of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And Kerby, you know that in the Greek language, definite articles are a big deal.
More so than in English.
More so than in English. And in the Greek, it indicates distinction. So you've got three distinct persons within the one God. So that's probably a better verse, but certainly Genesis 1:1 is a supportive evidence.
Let's go back to what you said just before the break, though, because you pointed out that some of the verses that I would hear, and I've run into this quite often, as a matter of fact, with Jehovah's Witnesses and people of other religious groups that will say, well, yeah, but Jesus at one point says that the Father is greater than I am. You certainly have what is known as the kenosis passage, the idea that he is emptying himself and things like that. So how do you deal with those where there seems to be a superiority of God the Father and an inferiority of Jesus? That's
a great question. You know, on the one hand, you want to set forth a positive presentation that Jesus is God. And there's a lot of good verses that you can use to do that. And if we have time, I can tell you some good ways to do that. But at the same time, you need to answer their objections, and their objections generally focus on certain verses that they think indicate that Jesus is inferior. For example, Jesus did say the Father is greater than I am, but you must understand the context of that verse. Jesus is on the earth, about to go to Jerusalem, about to be crucified between two common thieves. He's been persecuted all along for his entire ministry by the Jewish leaders. Meanwhile, the Father is up in heaven, surrounded by angels of glory, singing, Holy, Holy, Holy. And so while Jesus is on the earth being persecuted and the Father's up in heaven in glory, Jesus says, positionally speaking, the Father is greater positionally than I am.
True. But
then he goes on to talk about how, not to worry because I'm going back to my place of glory. And he even talks about that in John 17, where he talks about his glory being restored, the glory that he had before the foundation of the world. And so that verse doesn't indicate that Jesus is a lesser being. It simply indicates that the incarnate Christ, while he was on the earth, was in a state of humility.
Right.
And by the way, that's what Philippians 2, verses 5 to 11 is talking about.
I think
you
so.
mentioned the kenosis, and that's a foreign word to most Christians.
I used it, yeah.
It's a Christianese word.
Yes. Those of us that teach in seminary use it
sometimes. What it means,
yeah.
It talks about how Christ emptied himself. And it doesn't mean that Christ emptied himself of deity. What it basically means is that Jesus voluntarily chose not to use all of his attributes on some occasions in order to fulfill his messianic ministry. And he also veiled his pre-incarnate glory. His glory is so great that if he appeared to a human being in his full glory, they'd just dissolve in his glory. So Christ veiled his glory in the incarnate state and chose not to use all of his attributes on some occasions. For example, when he was going to Bethany from Jerusalem, he could have just beamed himself over there in his divine nature. But he didn't do that. He was a man. He became a man, so he walked and became tired in the process. That was part of his fulfillment of his messianic ministry. He never used his attributes to make his life as a human life as a human being easier, but always used it as signs to indicate his true identity.
That's very good. Well, you were talking about being persecuted. That brings us to one of the key elements here, and that's salvation. And you have chapters here on the crucifixion of Jesus and his resurrection, because here again is where Jehovah's Witnesses really deviate substantially, to put it mildly, from Orthodox Christianity in terms of our salvation.
Well, that's right. First of all, there's two groups of saved people. There's 144,000 anointed Christians, and these get spiritually resurrected to reign with Christ in heaven. And then there's the other sheep. These are the other Jehovah's Witnesses that have to live forever on a restored earth. So they get resurrected physically. So there's two groups of saved people. Now, they teach that the last slot for the anointed class got filled up in 1935. So that means that all you can hope for today is being in the earthly class, which is the lower class. And so two groups of salvation or saved people. Now, how do you get there? How do you get saved anyway? Well, it's by works, basically. They do say they believe in salvation by grace, but they redefine grace. And they basically say that God is so gracious that he now allows you to go out and earn your salvation. Now, that's not biblical grace. Biblical grace is grace alone. It is a free gift of salvation. But they say God is being gracious in allowing you to earn your salvation. And apparently part of that involves going door to door handing out literature. This is their take on Philippians 2:12 that says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. And they believe that that involves going door to door, working out their salvation by distributing Jehovah's literature. After all, the voice of Jehovah speaks through Watchtower literature. That's what they believe. And so salvation is hard.
Yes, very hard.
But, when you read the New Testament, why is it that salvation seems so very easy? Trusting in Jesus Christ for the free gift of salvation, and there's nothing you can do to earn it. And, of course, I like to ask a lot of questions of Jehovah's Witnesses when they come to my house. And, I talk about that in fullness in my book, Reasoning from the Scriptures with Jehovah's Witnesses. And that's got a couple of dozen good questions on salvation you can ask.
Questions. One of the questions, Ron Rhodes, that I suspect some people are thinking about right now is, well, if they believe in grace, how did they deal with Ephesians 2:8 and 9? Because that is a passage that says that we are saved by grace and not by works. And here, the Watchtower Society says you have to work out your salvation. How do they deal with that passage?
It's the kind of thing where they do believe in grace, and that's the verse they would go to support their idea that salvation is by grace. But then they would say that other Bible verses qualify what is meant in Ephesians 2:8 and 9. One of those being, Philippians 2:12 that says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Another being the statements in James that, faith without works is dead. And so, yes, there is faith and there's grace, but it's got to be involved with works, because without those works, you don't have true faith and true grace, you see. And so they kind of jumble it all together, and it's all leaning towards works. And the thing of it is in Scripture is that the works are important, but works follow salvation. Works follow salvation. Salvation comes as a free gift of grace. And then once you trust in Christ for salvation, the Holy Spirit works in your life and starts to reproduce the family likeness in your life. In other words, you start to look more like Jesus.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll give a few more of you a chance to join our conversation. If you want to ask a quick question, we focus most of our time and attention today on Jehovah's Witnesses, but if you'd like to get some other questions answered, we will certainly give you that opportunity. 1-800-351-1212. Just joined us. We're talking with Ron Rhodes today. His latest book, Conversations with Jehovah's Witnesses, and you can find out more at his website. Matter of fact, he has some of his other previous books there, What Happens After Life. The last time we had him in studio, we talked about that. And of course, we've been referring to his book, Reasoning from the Scriptures with the Jehovah's Witnesses, perhaps the definitive book. And either or both would be great resources, and you can go to ronrhodes.org. We have a link to that on our website. We have an article that helps you a little bit understand some basic principles about conversing with Jehovah's Witnesses. So you can kind of read that and get a sense of how that book would be helpful to you. And we've also posted a very good presentation he did at Dallas Theological Seminary on this issue as well. Let's take a break. We'll take some more phone calls right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Privileged to have in studio with us a little bit longer, Dr. Ron Rhodes, Conversations with Jehovah's Witnesses. And let's go to Joanne first, listening on KCTA. Joanne, thank you for calling today.
Thank you. How are you doing?
Very good. I'd love to hear your testimony.
Well, I just wanted to say that the last time that Mr. Rhodes was on, it was that week I had some Jehovah Witnesses come to my house.
You
and
did?
I've talked to them, yeah. I've talked to them before, and just said different things about Jesus and whatnot, but really, it was no big deal. And I didn't even remember what our conversation was about, but I was saying a lot of things I had just heard. And so, they were really perking up and whatnot, and I kept telling them, well, it's about Jesus. You've got to give your heart to Jesus and ask him to forgive your sins and so on. Well, we believe in Jesus. We believe that. I said, oh, you do? And so, well, we talked for a while, probably about 15 minutes, and they said, can we come back again? And I said, well, sure.
Oh, that's awesome.
They actually came back about 3 or 4 days ago, and my husband answered the door, and he shooed him away.
But, Joanna, you were making a point that I would like to
Yes.
make, and that is when people are prepared, God brings people across your path. I was speaking on some of this, maybe not as eloquently as Ron Rhodes, and people in my Sunday school class said, well, I have one person I work with that's a Jehovah's Witness. Another one said they knocked on my door, and I said, oh, isn't that hilarious? Well, I think in some respects, once God has prepared you, I believe that God lots of times brings people
Yes.
across your path to address those issues.
It just shows how God is providentially in control.
Yes.
And I'm so glad to hear the caller say what she did. And it brings up another point, too, and that is the terminology block. The Jehovah's Witnesses, well, we believe in Jesus, you know.
Sure.
And the thing is, cults always use the same words we do, but they pour a different definition into those words. Words
Right.
like Jesus and God and salvation and crucifixion and all that. And so, one of the important things is just to always define what you mean by the words that you use. Don't just say Jesus. Don't just say gospel. Don't just say, by grace. Explain what you mean by that from the New Testament.
Let me just mention that we actually have more calls than we will possibly be able to get to, and we'll do our best. But at the same time, also brings me to Ron talking about something that you do, and that is you have been very gracious over the years to respond to every email that you get at ronrhodes.org. So let me encourage people, if they don't get their question answered on air, you have been very gracious over the years to answer their questions.
Well, we'll do our best.
Let's go to South Carolina. Hugh, WLPG. Thank you for calling today.
Glad to do so, and thanks again for the program and your ministry. Referencing the salvation and works, I appreciated your clarification just before the break, but I think that there are a few scriptures that can even add to that. I know you're aware of these scriptures, but you have limited time in terms of explanation. But Peter in 1 Peter 1 talks about those chosen according to the foreknowledge of God. In Ephesians 1, Paul talks about that we are chosen in him before the foundation of the world. And then in Romans 8, we're told after that, passage that many of us know, that God causing all things to work together for good, that those whom he foreknew, he predestined to become conformed to the image of God, and whom he predestined, he called, whom he called, he justified, and whom he justified, he glorified, in the past tense, as if it's already an accomplished fact, and in his mind and his plan it is, because he knows who are his from before time began. And it's interesting that in that Romans 8:30 passage, that sanctification is not mentioned, and it seems to me that by omission, an argument from silence, adds to the, I think, the biblical understanding of the Philippians 2 passage, where we're to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling, and that's our responsibility to be doing the works that bring about holiness and sanctification. And of course, he follows that in Ephesians 2 by saying, for it is God himself who is at work in you, both the will and the do. And so in Ephesians 10, he's prepared beforehand good works that we should do. And so I don't think there's any biblical basis that anyone can stand on that it's actually works that save us, but works are a result of. And yes, we're supposed to work in terms of our sanctification or holiness.
I love all those verses you cited. I mean, I wish I had 15 minutes to talk about each verse, but here's the thing. What you've talked about is a God-glorifying view of salvation, and I'm with you, okay? The Jehovah's Witnesses, though, make it all about human beings.
Yeah.
You see, they make it all about your personal effort in pleasing Jehovah. And all the verses you just mentioned, they don't like to mention. Those verses are, non-gratis. I mean, they stay away from those. And in terms of why they do that, I mean, it's quite obvious. Cults typically will focus only on those verses that will support their view and ignore everything else. And we call this compartmentalization. Any verse that you bring up that contradicts what they believe, they file in the circular file or the trash can, and they ignore it, and they don't let it bother them. And I've noticed this over and over again, not just in Jehovah's Witnesses, but many other cults as well. One final thing, if I might. Philippians 2:12 is a controversial passage. There's a good case that you can make for collective salvation in that passage. Paul had just pointed out a number of problems in the Philippian church. There was antinomianism, some people didn't like any mention of the law. There were a lot of people who were teaching perfectionism, that you had to be perfect to please God and stuff like that. So Paul was basically saying, according to some theologians, that, listen, church, you need to get your act together. Don't make me come there and babysit you. You guys work this out for yourselves. Work your salvation out with fear and trembling. Take care of these problems so that I don't have to come there. You see, the word salvation can be used in a number of different ways in the Bible.
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily personal salvation. It was just the idea of working out.
So that verse may not
life.
relate to your eternal salvation at all. It may relate to the state of affairs in the Philippian church that Paul wanted the Philippians to get right.
Wish we had more time, and I've got a whole bank of phone calls. Maybe next time we'll have you in for 2 hours. But one of the things that I want to emphasize just before we wind down today, Ron, is that this book is really kind of a training manual. The previous book, Reasoning from the Scriptures, is kind of a teaching manual, and these two books would be very helpful as a point and counterpoint, and one, in a sense, gives you a chance, as you said, to listen in to the questions and the interaction in this one on Conversation with Jehovah's Witnesses. But if people want the full meal deal, you've got a 450-page book there as well that are all available at your website.
Well, they all go together. It's not one or the other, but they're complementary books, and one book points to the other constantly.
Yeah.
And the beauty of the Conversations book is that it's like the reader can eavesdrop with me sharing with a Jehovah's Witness. I get to show the reader how I do it. And so that's helpful to a lot of people. It's not just a matter of having all the facts from the other book, but once you have those facts, how do you actually go through the process? And that's why I wrote the Conversations book.
I know that you love films, and there is an old Woody Allen film where at one point he's talking about Marshall McLuhan, and they're having a debate, and all of a sudden he pulls Marshall McLuhan in and disagrees with the guy that was arguing with Woody Allen. And there's a sense in which, by bringing these books along, you can sort of have Ron Rhodes right next to you when you have a Jehovah's Witness at your doorstep or in your home. And so it's just a great way that we can kind of pull you in and see what you have said are some of the most effective ways to witness to Jehovah's Witnesses. So thank you so very much for taking the time to write another book that helps train us on some of the basic information that you've made available to us in the past.
Well, to God be the glory. All I like to do is talk about the Word of God and how it answers the problems in the cult. So, to the extent that I can succeed in doing that, praise the Lord.
Well, again, as people go to your website, ronrhodes.org, they can find any of your books. There's all sorts of other great resources. And if some of the people still online here that would like to ask you questions would like to do so, you answer all your emails.
I do answer the questions. It takes me a while sometimes, especially after a radio show.
Yes.
But typically we can get anywhere from 100 to 500 emails even in a day. And so, obviously, we have some massive databases helping us, but we try to get back with everybody, but it just takes a little bit of time.
We're going to try to get you back on another topic and maybe give you a full 2 hours because obviously you generate lots of phone calls. So we'll see if we can do that in the future.
Look forward to it.
Ron Rhodes has been with us in this hour. And if you would like to know more about him, we've made it very easy. We have information about his book, Conversations with Jehovah's Witnesses. We have his very good presentation in front of Dallas Theological Seminary. You can see some of the old professors there listening in as well as the students. And so you can watch that video. Might hit that share button and then put it on your web page or on your Facebook or whatever you might have. Maybe you have a blog. That'll be a great conversation starter. And then, of course, under web links, we have the web link to ronrhodes.org. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to change topics, but I hope that you appreciated our first hour conversation. We have much more coming up right after this.
Across the nation, this is Point of View. For materials offered during the broadcast, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track, and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
You know, every day we as parents or grandparents face a situation in which we have some uncomfortable experience. We walk in and the kids are watching something on television. We can't believe what's on the screen there. We know it's going to turn them into a pillar of salt. What in the world can we do? We recognize that they are, in a sense, dealing with all sorts of cultural issues and their cultural landmines. But we believe that even the negative experiences certainly can be teachable moments, and certainly the positive ones out there as well certainly are ones that we should use. And so I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation as we talk about teachable moments, using everyday encounters with media and culture to instill conscience, character, and faith. This book has just come out, and it is written by Marybeth Hicks. She is a columnist and a speaker and founder and editor of ontheculture.com, which is a blog for American women. We also, of course, I've mentioned, and we have links for her websites, that one as well as her own personal one, her column Teachable Moments, and she is the author of some previous books as well. Don't Let the Kids Drink the Kool-Aid, Confronting the Left's Assault on Our Family's Faith and Freedom, Bringing Up Geeks, How to Protect Your Kids' Childhood in a Grow-Up-Too-Fast World, and The Perfect World Inside My Minivan, One Mom's Journey Through the Streets of Suburbia. She's a graduate of Michigan State University, actually serves as an advisory board on the Parents Television Council, author of this new book, Teachable Moments. Marybeth, just a delight to have you on the program today.
Thank you so much, Kerby. I'm really excited to be with you.
As I understand, this book's just come out, so you're just now starting to give people a chance to understand some of these ideas. But there were things in this book that, in a sense, have surfaced in some of your previous books, true?
Yes, absolutely. So it's kind of an interesting pathway. So the Geek book was my first stab at a parenting book, and I kind of talked about the ways in which my husband and I had, decided to be a little countercultural and resist that culture of cool, because we knew that if we had geeky kids, they'd turn out to be great adults. And then just recently I saw some research that actually bore out my whole theory. It's actually true. If your kids are really cool on the front end, they won't be as successful in life, and vice versa. And then the Kool-Aid book was really about educating parents about all the ways in which the culture, through the education system, media, and pop culture, are really undermining the values of our children's generation and kind of molding them into be the first generation of American secularists and socialists. And so we needed to be keeping an eye out for that. And just about the time that book came out, the Occupy Wall Street movement happened and proved my point completely.
Sure.
And then this book brings us back home again. So now I'm back around the kitchen table trying to help parents, really figure out how not to let this culture hijack our children and their values and their hearts and opinions, but to really take those things that they encounter and use them to our advantage as springboards for learning about the values that we want to instill.
Might just mention that we are making the book available in our Point of View store, but you certainly can find it in your local bookstore as well. It should be easy to find, but if you can't find it, we certainly make it available there. Also have web links to Marybeth Hicks as well as ontheculture.com. And early on in the book, you talk about this idea of intentional parenting. You can't parent by autopilot. And I thought one of the things that you did early on is create a list of words that define the character that you want to instill in your kids. And you take us from the A's, accountability and accountable and appreciative and benevolent and brave, all the way down to the T's like tough and trusting and trustworthy, truthful and wise. That's helpful because lots of times parents, Marybeth, don't really know what their goal is. They want to raise good kids and they want to protect them from some of the dangers, but they're not really quite sure how to instill some of those character values, and that involves the intentional parenting you talk about in the book.
Exactly, Kerby. Some things, I think it's almost a shame that parents have really lost a sense of skill or knowledge about how to do this. We know how to get our kids onto the travel soccer team or how to get them tennis lessons early on or baseball camp, but we don't necessarily have a vocabulary for the morality and the character that we want to instill, beyond basically be nice and be good, and these are just sort of nebulous words that don't really help us. So one of the things we have to do is we have to actually think of words that mean something concrete. And so if we talk to our children about how we want them to behave, we say, hey, we want you to be discerning about your friendships and use good judgment so you can make wise choices, so you can demonstrate your responsibility. Those are strong words that help a kid understand what we expect.
Well, and one of the things that is really kind of a theme that runs through the book is the idea of teachable moments. Everybody knows carpe diem, seize the day, but carpe articulum, seize the moment. And it seems to me that parenting is intentional and then also, in a sense, accidental. You have those teachable moments which give you an opportunity to instill some of those values. And I've said before that a lot of what kids pick up is more caught than taught. They're like values vacuum cleaners that suck up the values there. You can talk about being honest, but they're going to learn a lot more by how you react if somebody gives you too much change back when you are making change, or they can understand a little bit more about what honesty means if you, when the phone rings, say, tell them I'm not here. And so it seems to me that we should use those moments as those teachable moments.
Absolutely. So first of all, we know that teaching by example is one of the strongest things that we do as parents. And so if we want our kids to have good character, we have to exhibit good character, and we have to actually walk our kids through those times when we ourselves confront a moral dilemma or a moral choice that we make. And so I recall, walking back into the grocery store with a big package of toilet paper that had been on the bottom rung of my cart, and I had forgotten to put it up on the top, and walk in, and somebody in the store said, I can't believe you bring that back in when you walked out with it. You had it. What were you thinking? I said, well, I guess I just got raised right. I don't know. I'm thinking I should pay for it. Good grief. But, those are the things, you drive home from the grocery store, you got the kids in the back, and you say, you know what, our honesty and our integrity are more important to us than anything. If we can't have integrity, then we can't look at ourselves in the mirror. But those are just little things that happen, and they do happen frequently throughout the course of a day or a week, and we have to take advantage of those. And so you don't just go back and pay for it. When you come back to the car, you talk about why you paid for it and why it was important.
Certainly. And in your chapter that you talk about some of the moral development, you point out that there really is age appropriate. You talk about children ages 2 to 7. They can understand the concepts of right and wrong, good and bad. Ages 7 to 12 understand the concepts of responsibility, accountability, modesty. And then by the age of 13 to 18, they can act as moral agents. So you also understand that at different ages, there are different life lessons people can learn. And so those are some of those teachable family moments that you talk about in the book.
Yeah, I just think it's so important to just start to learn to weave these kinds of ideas into some very, otherwise innocuous conversations. So, if your child is telling you about something somebody put up on Instagram or a picture, or somebody put a tweet out on Twitter, and, you just make a comment, boy, that really reflects on somebody's good character when they say something, so defends, when they defend somebody who's vulnerable with their tweet. Or, gosh, it really disappoints me to see a friend put a picture that's so immodest on Instagram. Everybody's going to see this, and what does that say about somebody's character? And I hope you use good judgment with your Instagram pictures. That's simple. It's not just to say, I don't like that picture. It's to say, that doesn't reflect well, and this is why. These are the ways that we teach.
One of the lines that we sometimes use around our house is, you're better than that. And this is a fantastic book, lots of very creative things, but then some blow-up quotes from everybody from, athletes like Tim Tebow or Terry Bradshaw to actresses like Sandra Bullock and scholars like C.S. Lewis. And I think you're going to really enjoy the book, and I hope you will enjoy the rest of our conversation today as we continue our conversation with Marybeth Hicks and her book, Teachable Moments. More coming up right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Perhaps you've seen the full-page advertisement with this attention-getting headline. Jews rejected child sacrifice 3,500 years ago. Now it's Hamas's turn. Nobel Prize laureate Elie Wiesel is calling on Hamas and others in the Muslim world to reject the practice of using children as human shields and suicide bombers. He begins with biblical history. Over 3,000 years ago, God stopped Abraham from killing his son. Both sons, Isaac and Ishmael, received promises that they would father great nations. He concludes that the Canaanite practices of child sacrifice to Moloch were forever left behind. Unfortunately, they were not left behind. He says that the real battle today is not between Jew versus Arab or Israeli versus Palestinian. Rather, it is a battle between those who celebrate life and those who champion death. It is a battle of civilization versus barbarism. He observes that the two cultures that brought us the Psalms of David and the rich libraries of the Ottoman Empire share a love of life. What a contrast to the dark future offered by Hamas. Parents in Gaza City and Tel Aviv want peace, but they will not experience it as long as the Hamas death cult reigns. He says that moderate men and women of faith must shift their criticism from the Israeli soldiers and focus instead on the terrorists who have taken away all choice from the Palestinian children of Gaza. He believes that the Palestinian people should find true Muslims to represent them and truly value life. They should find Muslims who would never place children in danger. His goal is to return child sacrifice to the darkest corner of history and work towards a brighter future with those who choose life. Although I share his hope, I do have my doubts about whether we can indeed achieve such a goal. Nevertheless, we should continue to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Marybeth Hicks with us today as we talk about her book, Teachable Moments. Might mention that she is married, has 4 children. They live in Michigan, and so she is a fellow traveler trying to think about using these teachable moments to educate her children, and certainly we will be talking about many different aspects of that. There are whole chapters on teachable family moments, teachable media moments, teachable friendship moments, teachable moments at school and in sports and the real world, all sorts of issues to address today. And a little bit later, we're going to open up the phones to give you a chance to join our conversation. Now, Marybeth, let's, if we can, maybe move to that one on media. Certainly we can double back to some of the family ones, but certainly when we talk about teachable moments in media and culture, a lot of people say, I don't know, maybe it's just simpler to get rid of the television and make sure we don't have internet. And first of all, I haven't found very many families that want to do that, unless it's some of my Amish friends. But everybody else certainly has to deal with media. Your argument is that we can use media in an intentional way. How so?
Yes, so exactly. We know, as you just said, we can't necessarily eschew the media. It's pervasive, it's everywhere, it's saturating our culture, and it's really, our kids' generation is never going to know life without it. So we have to just accept that it is part of where we are, and media itself is morally neutral, can be good, can be bad. We're having this great conversation and Christian values, and so we know that we can use media for very good things. But it also can really ruin people, and we know that, the scourge of pornography, for example, is one example of a way in which media is just, taking literally souls and stealing them. And so we have to be really careful about what we allow and how we use it. And then we need to recognize that oftentimes, instead of letting the media sort of infuse its values into our kids, we want to use those encounters with it to springboard into conversations so that we can frame the content that our children see and hear with our own moral perspective. So we don't just say, oh, that's a terrible, sitcom theme that's, highly sexualized or objectifies women or, does whatever it does. We know it does all kinds of things.
Sure.
But we have to comment on it in a way that really frames it for our kids. And we say, it really troubles me that they use this theme. It's such a cheap laugh, but really it just so objectifies women, and it just promotes this idea that, marriage is, something that isn't valued or whatever. Whatever the point is, we can always take what we see and hear and use it to our advantage rather than just let it kind of hijack the moment and leave it there on the table for our kids to absorb.
You have a whole section that you talk about some of the things that really assault our values. You mentioned Glee is one example, but we can pick a number of others. As Ted Baer has said on this program before, if all you knew about American culture was what you saw on television, you would think there are more homosexuals in America than there are Christians in America. And you would think that all homosexuals are good and all Christians are bad. I mean, that shows you just two stereotypes. First of all, the positive presentation of the so-called gay lifestyle and the vilification, really, of anybody with religious values. Those are issues that we need to address because as young children, they may not pick up on it. By the time they get into middle school and certainly into high school, it's very easy to show that those views and those programs have had a very profound impact on the way young people today view everything from Christianity, faith, salvation, even the gay lifestyle.
Yeah, so this is exactly what, you asked me about my previous books, and this was pretty much the whole theme of my Don't Let the Kids Drink the Kool-Aid book, which is to get to know this generation of young people is to understand that the media and pop culture and our education system have been profoundly successful in molding and shaping the attitudes of children. And so we need to be more responsive, and we need to be, we can't just assume that this exposure to media is benign. It is not. And if we don't fill that void for our children, this media culture will fill it for us, and it will do it very effectively because, as you said, it uses narrative. It uses shows like a Glee or, sitcoms where the characters are purposefully carved out to present certain images and convey certain political points of view. And so, we really have to be savvy media consumers with and for our children.
Again, Don't Let the Kids Drink the Kool-Aid is a previous book, and I certainly would recommend that one as well. This one, of course, is talking about teachable moments. One of the teachable moments you have there has to do with, well, what if a 12-year-old daughter wants to get a Facebook page or, of course, we're not just talking about Facebook anymore. We're talking about Instagram and Snapchat, and we're talking about Twitter and just all sorts of different social media. How do we think through that? Those are questions that previous parents, including myself, since my kids are older, we never had to address. But now parents out there right now are saying, well, what about all of these social media? What kind of advice would you give to those parents?
Yeah, it's a very important question. Not only should you allow your children to be in social media, but when and how much of it should you allow, what platforms should you use. And the first piece of advice I have for all parents is know what the platforms are, know what the various social media choices are, and make sure that you understand them, how they work, and make sure you're the one teaching your kid how to use them. Because if we let our children lead us down the media path, they know that they can pull one over on us. And I think our job as parents is to stay that step ahead. It's difficult to do for some people. It's hard to find the time or to really take a little bit of time. There's great resources, in my book as well, but also online to find what are the popular sites with kids and how are they using them and what do you need to know as a parent. And then you have to be out there with them a little bit, so maybe designate one parent in the home if not everybody wants to do it, to be the social media mom or dad, have an account on Instagram and Snapchat and all those places so that you can be aware of how your child is using it.
Very well said. One of the quotes that you have in here is from Bill Cosby. He was on Jimmy Fallon last night, but I think this would be another thing to communicate to your kids, because Bill Cosby, you quote in the book, said, kids need to remember that when you put something on Twitter, it's not like you're whispering to your friend. You've put it on a billboard that the whole world, including your own kids, someday can see. The point is that a lot of young people don't think of the logical consequences of what they do in social media. We know now from brain studies that their prefrontal cortex is maybe not as well developed, so they're not thinking long term. what, after I post this picture, if I post this statement, will it have as an impact later on when I get a job, maybe even later on when I have kids and they look at that. And so those are the kind of principles I think we need to communicate, Marybeth, to our children.
Yeah, so everything that we do out in that social media world is always a reflection of character, and that's the big message that really is the central theme of this book, Teachable Moments, is that I'm trying to help parents to understand that, we need to be more focused on all aspects of our children's character, and their behavior is how they exhibit that character. I mean, we'd all love to be able to look into our children's hearts and know what they really are all about, but God is really the only one who can do that. The rest of us have to rely on the outward behavior that tells us what's in somebody's heart. And so we really want to explain that to our children and help them understand that this is the way you communicate what is inside to the outside world. And whether it's by a tweet or the way you treat a friend or the way you treat your sibling or whether you lie and steal or, shoplift from a grocery store, whatever it is you're doing is a way for us to know who you really are. And in our culture, we've really separated children's behavior from their character in kind of an odd way. We've left them unaccountable for explaining themselves. We say, "Oh, well, you're a good person. You just made you made a bad choice." When in fact, our choices reflect our goodness or not. And so we need to make sure that our children understand that.
Well, and again, one of the things I love about each one of the chapters is you have some of the quotes, you have some suggested teachable moments, and then you end with what's called the lesson plan. And just before we leave media, in your lesson plan there, you talk about such things as there's no such thing as privacy in cyberspace. You suggest that never text, email, or message anyone to complain, gossip, hash out disagreement, or convey your hurt feelings. Because, again, you should not use technology to avoid personal communication. All sorts of very helpful suggestions. And these are helpful not only for parents trying to raise their kids, but if you can pass some of these on to your more mature children, maybe again in middle school and high school, to recognize that they might do something in social media that will have negative consequences down the road. And so those rules are there not because you're an overbearing parent, but because you're trying to protect them from some of the consequences if they don't use those particular forms of media in a responsible way.
Boy, that's so true. Those of us, my youngest of 4 has just started the process of applying to colleges, and we've been clear all along that people are using this technology for a whole lot of purposes now. We're aware of a banker friend who says they check people's Facebooks now before they approve loans.
Sure.
Because they want to know who these people really are. And so these are just very insightful ways that people evaluate your character. And we want our kids to be able to pass that test, not just because they've learned to be protective on Facebook or in social media and be shrewd about it, but because they really are a reflection of the way that you treat other people and the reflection of the way that you conduct yourself.
Let's take a break. When we come back, let's open up the phones in case you have some comments or questions. I know most of you kind of want to just sit back and learn from Marybeth Hicks today, and that is certainly possible, but perhaps you have some comments about things you've had to deal with in terms of your family and maybe learned a little bit on some of these teachable moments. That is the title of the book. It is just out, and I would certainly recommend the book to you, and if you can find it in your local bookstore, buy it. But we also have it on our Point of View store so that you can find it there as well. If you'd like to know a little bit more about Marybeth Hicks, marybethhicks.com. We have a link there. We also have ontheculture.com. We have those links on the website, information about the book, and a free chapter so that you can get a fairly good idea of what is in the book. So all of those resources available at our website, pointofview.net. But if you'd perhaps like to join our conversation today, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Talking about Teachable Moments with Marybeth Hicks. We'll have more right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Marybeth Hicks as we talk about her book, Teachable Moments. And Marybeth, just before we get into some more in your book, let's talk about some of the links that we have provided to your various web pages. We have, of course, marybethhicks.com. We also have some of the other links that people would like to follow as well on theculture.com. Talk about some of the resources that are available there. They can obviously order the book from you if they would like to do so, but also follow your blog. So talk about what is available for parents looking for more information.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I've tried to do in my writing career, I've been a writer and columnist for about 10 years. I formerly wrote for the Washington Times for 9 years.
Right.
And I just tried to frame the issues and the cultural phenomena that come up, in a way that helps parents kind of use it to their advantage and understand it a little bit, whether it's trends or, the latest fads for teens and tweens or some research that comes out. And so that's really what we've tried to provide through myself and several other women writers at On the Culture. And then my website is really just a way for folks to get in touch with me, to bring me in for speaking engagements. I tend to speak a lot to parent groups and parishes and churches, and just try and really offer some encouragement and some education for parents. I think one of the things that happens is we get so caught up in the work of parenting that we don't take a lot of time necessarily to think it through and plan, and also, importantly, for spouses to be on the same page with that and to be trying to parent in a way that is kind of as a team. So I try to approach those things in my own personal ministry work.
Well, let me again mention some of your previous books as well. Bringing Up Geeks, How to Protect Your Kids' Childhood in a Grow Up Too Fast World. Excellent book. And then, of course, the one we've mentioned more than once, Don't Let the Kids Drink the Kool-Aid, Confronting the Left's Assault on Your Family's Faith and Freedom. Reminds me of some of the things you used to write for on the Washington Times. But this book we're talking about today, Teachable Moments, Using Everyday Encounters with Media and Culture to Instill Conscience, Character, and Faith. One of your chapters is on teachable friendship moments. Oh, there's the big one. I was concluding early on as a parent with my 3 kids that if I have the right kids around my kids, a lot of my problems go away. Because if they're reinforcing our family values, the parenting task was a little easier. But if they were around kids who were undermining the values that we had in the home, that was also a real challenge. And so early on, you talk about the importance of teaching your kids how to be discerning and how to pick good friends.
Yeah, it's such a difficult thing because, of course, we start out with kids when they're early in preschool and kindergarten, the early grades in school. Everyone is your friend, and we want them to consider everyone a friend, and we assume that everyone will be, a delightful playmate. And we might be tracking pretty closely with other families and with other children as we go. And then you get to be about, depending on whether it's a boy or a girl, tends to be, maybe 3rd grade or 5th grade or 7th grade. And all of a sudden you realize your family may be making really different decisions from some of those around you, and even some that you become very close to the parents, or your children, have been best friends growing up, and you've been in they've been in each other's homes continuously. And then all of a sudden, maybe usually we found that it was a family was allowing a lot more encountering with the culture than we were allowing, and so TV shows that were allowed to be watched by our friends, and going online and using certain video games. And then all of a sudden somebody gets a phone in, the 4th grade, and that changes everything. Now, you've got kids who are communicating through their phones and texting, and your child, if you don't have the phone yet, is left out of that. And our kids didn't get phones till they were it's freshmen in high school, Kerby, so we were way behind the curve, right?
Whoa.
So, talk about radical. So, but those are the things, you think you're on the same path, and then all of a sudden you realize we have to use discernment in order to find those friends that do uphold our values and cherish us for who we are. And, so those are skills that we need to teach our children so that they use wise judgment.
One of the things that is a great challenge, since I'm the oldest one around the table here, is that I remember a time growing up where there was a conspiracy of the parents against the kids. And what was happening there is everybody had the same basic values. And I was surprised that when I went next door, the parents had the same value as my parents, but even more shocked when I went to school and realized the teachers had the same values as my parents and my next door neighbors. So there was this whole conspiracy, if you will, against the kids by the parents because everybody had the shared values. Well, now, Marybeth, it seems to me we have just the reverse. We almost have a conspiracy of the kids against the parents because what you see happening sometimes is the kids will play one parent off the other. Well, Johnny's mom lets them go to that movie. Well, Billy's mom lets them go to these particular venues. They get to go to that concert. He's got a cell phone. Why don't I? Those kind of issues, so I think, illustrate that even in the same church, sometimes we don't have the same set of shared values. And that is one of the greatest challenges, I think, for parents in the 21st century. What are your thoughts?
It really is. I'm going to say something even more radical than that, Kerby. I'm going to say sometimes the enemy of your child are the parents of his friends.
Yes.
Because parents are oftentimes literally providing the pathway to sin, if not just to poor judgment. And it is disheartening to me as a parent that there are times when I have to say, I'm not going to make a comment on so-and-so's parenting choices, but let's just say those aren't my choices. And I have to answer to God, and I'm not here to parent by proxy by letting somebody else make decisions for me that I believe are wrong. And I can't tell you how many times in my 25 years now as a parent that I've had people say to me, I really don't want to do X, Y, or Z. I don't want to buy my kid this racy outfit from Victoria's Secret, but it's what she really wants, and all her friends have it. And I sit there thinking, well, are you a potted plant, or did God put you here to have a reason?
And the thing I always think about is okay, let's take another one. Video games. Until you're 16 years of age, you can't drive to the video store and buy it, and you probably don't have a job, so you're dependent on the parents for that. So, and certainly when you talk about some of the movies the kids get to go to, they can't make. Maybe you have some of our listeners may live close enough that a kid could walk to the movie theater, but in almost every case, the parents are the enablers of some of those things, and all they have to do is learn that 2-letter word no, and things can turn around pretty quickly.
Yeah, we actually always have prefaced that 2-letter word with these words, because I love you. No. So, we have to remind our children that God gives us a huge responsibility in parenting them to use our best judgment, because we know our children don't have best judgment. They haven't grown to adulthood yet. If it was left up to kids, they would, eat Cocoa Puffs and drink Mountain Dew and quit school in the 5th grade. They don't know what's best for them. God put us here for a reason, and we need to use our influence and our authority over our children in order to give them those values and help them to become discerning friends and discerning adults. And so, these are examples, and it happens so routinely, times when the friends make this judgment or drop you and don't invite you, or encourage you to do something is wrong, or all these ways in which our kids involve with their friends, and they provide us opportunities to help mold and shape character, which is really our goal.
Again, a lot of great wisdom that is found in this book today, Teachable Moments by Marybeth Hicks. Let's move on to the teachable moments in school, where either already starting school or will start it shortly, and so a lot of parents now thinking about schools. But again, these are opportunities to share our values and inculcate some of those character values that we really want our children to develop.
Yeah, we do know that so many people rely on their public school systems and must do so, and can do so with confidence in most cases. But we also know that, our public schools have become places where people with certain points of view want to use the schools to be agents of social change. And so we can look forward to every year there are countless stories, religious oppression, basically, squelching of children's right to have religious expression in their public school, the normalization of homosexuality and other sexual issues through sexuality education programs that are wildly off the mark in terms of the things we're wanting to teach. The lifting up multiculturalism and diversity, but in exchange for patriotism and American pride, and so kind of almost downplaying our role as proud Americans. These are things that will come up routinely in this day and age in our school system, and so we have to be really aware of what's being taught in school, what the curriculum is, and this is where I really urge parents to use that dinner table every evening that you can. Make sure you're sitting down to dinner and talking about not just what happened in school, what the homework is, what is in the curriculum. What did you learn today? What did you talk about in class? What did your teacher tell you? Because it's amazing to me the things that have been brought home with my kids, and my kids went to private school, Christian school. So, I think it's important to really know what they're learning and be able to, infuse those things with our morality and our values, and offer the framework that we want them to understand things.
Be aware what's in the textbooks, what's in the curriculum, what's being taught in the schools. And this is, as we're coming to a break here, just one more reason why you might want to think about having Marybeth Hicks speak to your parent-teacher fellowship or your PTA or something of that nature, or take some of these principles and apply those as well. We come back, we'll talk about a few other chapters in the book. There's so much to cover. When, again, we certainly want to cover it, but 270 pages, a little hard to cover all of it in an hour, but we've certainly given you a pretty good overview. We'll continue that conversation with Marybeth Hicks right after these important messages.
betrayed without reason. You took the blame. You were rejected time and again. You loved your accusers the same as a friend. I wanna love the way you love, 'cause without love I am nothing, and I wanna love the way you love, 'cause without love I am nothing. You were beaten, you were betrayed without a reason. You took the blame. You were rejected time and again. You loved your accusers the same as a friend. And I wanna love the way you love, 'cause you are love. You are everything. I wanna love the way you love, 'cause you are love. You are everything. This is how I know love.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Marybeth Hicks with us for a few more minutes as we talk about her book, Teachable Moments, using everyday encounters with media and culture to instill conscience, character, and faith. Your chapter on teachable moments in sports, I love how it starts. He said, if you're like millions of American parents, there's a good chance you're reading this book while waiting in a minivan or SUV for your son or daughter to emerge from sports practice. Boy, we've all been there, haven't we not? But then, and I would like to use this maybe in one of my future commentaries, the study which I thought was so intriguing is that about 70% of children who participate in organized sports during their elementary school years will discontinue their participation by age 13. The biggest reason? It's not fun anymore. There's some real lifelong lessons that can be taught in both a positive way in terms of organized sports, but also some things and dangers we need to pay attention to, Marybeth.
Yeah, it's almost heartbreaking when you go into the research and realize that, you know, kids they want to play, they want to enjoy being part of the team, they want to be with their friends, and the reasons they give for quitting typically are it's not fun, it's too much pressure from the adults, and they don't get to play. You know, and kids routinely, here's another piece of that study, they much rather be on a losing team but get to participate than be on a winning team and have to sit on the bench. And, you know, parents don't understand, and coaches frequently don't understand, that kids and adults are looking for very different things. Now, I have kids who've been high achievers in certain sports. I have a son who runs in college, you know, so it can be very exciting when kids really push themselves to achieve their own goals and get to a high level in sports. But for the most part, we need to remember that participation in sports for children is really kind of a microcosm for life. It's a great metaphor for life, and it can really help us to instill some of those lessons about conscience, character, and faith that we're all looking for. And you know, sometimes it's losing, that, or being cut from a team, or being left off the roster, or whatever it is. Those are sometimes our most powerful avenues to teach. But in any way that our kids participate, we can use those examples for our advantage, as long as we're not part of the issue, getting in the way.
Well, again, I think almost anybody looks back on their sports career, how long it went. There were some obviously positives about perseverance and competition and cooperation and teamwork. I think all of us have some negatives. I mean, some of the harsh things that were said by my basketball coaches to me and things like that. I mean, I remember decades later. So it's, again, something that parents need to think through and evaluate, but it's one of those teachable moments. But I wanted to get at least to one more chapter, and that is teachable moments in the real world, because it seems to me that you are really talking about trying to mold and reveal character. You're really talking about all sorts of opportunities that we have in the real world for us to once again reinstill and to really nurture those kinds of values that we hope our adult children will have someday as they go through the process, as we are parents learning to take the experiences they have in the real world and use those in a positive way.
Yeah, so for one thing, I really think it's important that we let them have those experiences.
Sure.
You know, we live in a culture where we are hovering over our kids.
Oh, yes.
From the time they set off to go to kindergarten, and we're there, these stories of parents who are trying to call professors and email professors at college to try and go to bat for their kids' grades, and you're thinking to yourself, that's just the definition of crazy, but apparently people are doing it right and left. And then even worse than that, parents who go along with their kids to their job interviews or have been known to call employers to try and negotiate for their children's salaries. This is not the definition of adulthood. Adulthood is when our children get to a place where they no longer need us. And that's where we're all trying to head. We want them to get to be independent and responsible and resourceful, able to take care of themselves. And in order to do that, they have to have some experience of that throughout their lives. So we gradually give them a little bit more and a little bit more as they're growing up, opportunities to take care of themselves, to be alone, to negotiate the world safely, and learn that they can depend on themselves, because that's so important. And then, too, they have to have chances to make big mistakes. And then they make those mistakes, and we are right there with them, loving them and helping them to learn from those mistakes. And, obviously forgiving them, helping them to accept the consequences, to take responsibility, to be accountable, but also to learn from those. And too many parents, I think, are sweeping in and trying to keep their kids from experiencing the accountability piece of it, which is an unfortunate mistake.
That's a point I thought we might focus on for another minute or two, and that is the importance of letting them fail. We've talked about, or implied about, the helicopter parents hovering around, or sometimes now up there in Michigan, they talk about the snowplow parents. They're plowing the way for them. And I read in USA Today the other day that one of these millennials came in for a job interview with their parents. Marybeth, with their parents. Can you believe it? I know. You just cannot even make this stuff up. But
exactly.
One of the quotes you have here, Dave Ramsey, hitting bottom and hitting it hard was the worst thing that ever happened to me and the best thing that ever happened to me. When you have kids growing up with, kids buckled up and wearing helmets, riding bicycles, and I'm all for the safety. When I think of all the things we did when we did not have parents buckling us up all the time and making sure we had helmets and all the rest, we go out of our way to prevent them from ever failing. And as a result, everybody gets a trophy on the soccer team. Everybody's a winner. They're going to hit the world, and if they don't know how to deal with failure, they're going to be living with failure most of their life.
Yeah, it's almost sad, because we rob children of the full breadth of a human experience. If they don't get to fail, if they don't get to dust themselves off and pick themselves up, then they never also have the experience of the pride that comes from trying again and learning to be learning to persevere, to be resilient, to have an enormous amount of tenacity. That's a great character trait. I love to describe my children as tenacious. They are. They'll come back at you time and again until they achieve that thing that they set out their hearts to do. But they can't learn tenacity unless they are allowed to keep trying, to fail and keep trying. And if we keep framing all of our children's experience as always successful, because you got out there and you tried anyway, well, that's great, but sometimes you don't achieve the thing. And so you got to keep trying. And if we keep framing it in a way that makes them always feel good about it, then they don't have the incentive to go back and try and do it better, do it more. And so, we want to have kids who develop a work ethic. That's a character trait that we need them to have, that we can be proud of, that they'll develop. So these are all ways that failing and trying again really benefit our kids. Some people actually create opportunities for their kids to fail, believe it or not, because there's so few of them anymore. And in classrooms now, they have strategies called managed failure, if you can believe that, Kerby, because we don't let our kids fail. So now classrooms, teachers are manufacturing failure so that kids can work on something that's too hard so they can figure it out and experience the satisfaction of learning something difficult. And it's preposterous, but this is where our parenting skills have become so minimal that we don't even know to let kids just live life and accept failure as it comes.
I think of Dr. Erwin Lutzer's book, A Failure, the Backdoor to Success, and we can certainly learn that as well. Well, this book is full of great ideas, and at the end you talk about the fact you didn't intend to write a fourth book, but I'm glad you did, and I hope you keep writing, because we certainly have benefited in the past from books like Don't Let the Kids Drink the Kool-Aid and Bringing Up Geeks, and I might mention the other one there, The Perfect World Inside My Minivan. This one, Teachable Moments, Using Everyday Encounters with Media and Culture to Instill Conscience, Character, and Faith. Certainly have enjoyed some of the articles you've written in the past in Washington Times, and it is great to have you on the program today, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
Thank you so much, Kerby. I've really enjoyed this hour, and just so grateful for the chance to tell your listeners about this book.
Well, again, let's encourage people to go to your website. One of the things that we've done is provide links to marybethhicks.com. Also, the culture on theculture.com. Those links are available to you. And in the articles section, she made it available to give you a free chapter. And that free chapter, which I would encourage you to maybe print and download, actually has those characteristics that you might want to use from A to W. And so you can see a pretty good idea of some of the things that she has covered there. So all of it available in the website, and we certainly make it available on our website, pointofview.net. So I hope you enjoyed the 2 hours of interview today, and I hope that you will take the time to visit our website, pointofview.net. That's where you can find out about the various books, the various articles, the video that we've posted, and the web links. And if you aren't already receiving that in your inbox every day, I would encourage you to go to our Get Involved button, sign up for show threads, and maybe even sign up for my daily commentary. That way we can give you the information ahead of time. You have all the links necessary, and it's available to you free of charge. And it's our way of making sure that you're up to date on the material that we've covered and giving you a chance, if you missed the program, to go back and find out what we did cover and maybe find some of those links that you might need in the future. I want to thank Andrew and Catherine and Chris for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day, and we will see you back here tomorrow.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.